based on this topic. We are going to have our break immediately after the two lectures. More or less, we are calculating 1 hour and a half together with a poll. And afterwards, we are going to have the third work session that will last 1 hour and a half, plus half an hour for the recap. In the afternoon, we are going to have to welcome our new speakers. We will connect with Mrs. Di Meli, that she is going to give a lecture about public space remotely. Then we will have the honor to have 3 videos from 3 colleagues in different places of Europe that they are going to send us their case studies and their expertise on the topic. And then the lecturing part will finish with Professor Parthenios, who will conclude with a bridge between management and case studies on the use of new technologies. After that, we will finish with the last session, or the last work session, that pretty much will connect all of the things that you have been doing the last 2 days. Yesterday, we had the chance to start and listen from listening in the morning, hearing a lot of information regarding how we can build the strategies about public space, how we can imagine what is the role of public space in reinventing our cities, in creating quality, in bringing quality. We had the chance also to see the results from the preliminary phase, the first phase, where you all gathered information about the 85 public spaces in the city of Chania. And we proceeded with the lectures by our colleagues focused on digital technologies and engagement tools for participatory design. The work sessions of yesterday brought us to gather a lot of ideas and visions on how you envision, how you imagine a bridge between participation, new stakeholders, public space, and design and space, and the way that we change space. Today we are going, in the second work session, you went deeper into that, and you managed to start delving into the world of using new media, new technologies in engaging more people, and in understanding how we can build a strategy that helps ameliorate the quality we have in our public space. Here is a video of the yesterday's main highlights. I hope you enjoy it, and I'm very happy that we will start the day very soon, very shortly. Please enjoy the video for a couple of minutes, and then we pass to our first poll for the day.
Thank you, Mrs. Geropanda. Welcome all back. Today we're going to proceed with 3 polls in a row. So when you are ready, you can start sending your votes for the first poll. The first question for today is, how do you think new technologies could improve the access, the management of the use of public space? A, to make it easy for users to find public spaces. B, to improve the management, giving authorities rapid access to the state of public spaces. And C, to provide users with information on uses allowed, request new uses, or make proposals. So you can start sending your votes, and we will wait like 2 to 3 minutes until our next question. Also, the viewers who are watching us via our YouTube channel have the chance, if you have downloaded our application, the EVNT application, to send your vote too. we have 10 people voted by now, 11. We will wait 3 minutes more, 2 maybe. For the moment, the option C seems to be the more preferable, with 60% votes of the votes. Okay, I think we can proceed to our next question for today. Just give me a minute. Okay, so our next question for today is how can you influence the way public spaces are designed and used? A, I don't know. B, by matching proposals to the municipalities. And C, by getting involved in community initiatives. Okay, by now you seem to be, you all agreed to the C option. Okay. Okay, the C option seems to be the most preferable for now. I see 16 people have voted. We will wait a little bit longer. Okay, based on the fact that 15 people voted on the last question, I suppose that we won't be getting any other votes. So if you'll agree, we can proceed to our next question. Just give me a minute. Okay, so our next and last question for today's poll is which institutions are responsible for the management of public spaces? A, I don't know. B, the municipality. C, many institutions. Okay, it seems that you all agree that the responsibility is divided in many institutions, the C option. And I'm glad that we have a little bit more people voting. We're at 19 votes by now. Good. So I think you can all process with that a little bit later during your work session. And thank you all for sending your votes today. I give the word to Mrs. Geropanda to present our next speaker. Thank you all.
Thank you, Penny. It was excellent. Now we are passing to the first. We are going to have two lectures this morning. The title of their presentation is Legal and Governance Frameworks for Smart Cities, Public Space and Health Solutions. It is a part about management. We are very honored to have them. So first, it will be Mr. Gianluca Crispi, who is a legal specialist at the UN organization, the program Habitat, and an expert in climate change, environmental and social sustainability, rule of law, urban planning. Please, thank you.
Hello, good morning to everybody. Thanks for answering your polls, the questions before. I think it was clear, if I can comment briefly that, sorry, I moved everything. Okay. Yeah, so it was clear from your answer that if I can summarize them, starting from the last questions, that there are several institutions that are responsible in the city to manage and maintain public spaces. So it would be interesting to know also in the course of the working sessions after how these institutions are working together, if they are sharing information, if they are working jointly or not. Second question was about how do you see people's participation in public space design and management? Your I think the answer with the most answer was about community involvement. So obviously you don't see as there are institutionalized forms to ensure people's inputs on how public space are designed and managed. So that happens informally, and there are no institutional avenues from the municipalities to get people's feedback. And then the first question was about what is the main role smart new technologies can have, and how can make the management and the public involvement be more effective. And the answer with the most yes was the sharing of information. So you see new technologies more as a way for citizens to have access on the public spaces existing, on the allowed uses and so on, and less so as an instrument also for the public institution and the cities to manage the public spaces better, to gather information. But these are all things that is important you can reflect upon in the working session. Today, my presentation, no. It's only two buttons. It's off. My presentation will provide a general framework on how important and why important are laws and governance mechanisms for to have vibrant quality public spaces that are distributed across the city. They are designed in a way that is responding to people's needs. They're accessible, they're adequate in quantity, and so on. My colleague Jose mentioned it yesterday. Our data showed that globally there's a public space deficit. I think, if I don't remember wrongly, he mentioned 15% is the global average of urban land that is dedicated to green open spaces. UNHabitat believes that's not sufficient. our rough figure is getting close to 50% of urban land that should be dedicated to streets, green, and in general open spaces. This is a global program, problem that happens in virtually in every country, both in the global south and also in more developed economies. And this is a problem that is not limited to poor informal settlements, but also more planned, more residential, luxurious settlements can have similar patterns of public space deficit. This is a picture from our city, or the city where we are living, Nairobi, and we have two pictures, one on the left and one on top right. And below on the left is the biggest slum in Africa, is Kibera. And the neighborhood on top on the right is Muthaiga, which is one of the richest neighborhoods in Nairobi. Well, in both cases, we have roughly 3% of the space that is used for streets and other open air activities. So this is a problem that goes beyond planning and unplanned areas. It's more of a general problem. And I'm trying to go through a few regulatory and legal issues that contribute to this outcome. The first reason is that in cities or countries that are rapidly urbanizing, so where urban growth happens at a very high rate, which is not the case of European cities anymore, expansion happened informally, not in a planned manner, because it's fast, because the planning systems are not able to keep up with the demand. So as you can, if you stop planning for expansion, urban growth happens informally. And when happens informally, every single square meters of land is used for housing and less so for other important uses as streets, public spaces, green areas, and so on. But even when planning does take place, there is no guarantee that current planning standards and requirements ensure an adequate provision of public space, a network of streets that are well connected, and adequate supply of public facilities. In several countries where we work, there are no minimum requirements for public space and public facilities in terms of percentage or required public facilities that needs to be in place in new plan areas. So in some countries there is nothing, and it's totally left to the discretion and to the ability of planners. In some countries there are guidelines, so recommendations for certain facilities that it could be appropriate to have, but without any binding effect. Rules and regulations, they're not just abstract sentences and words, but they have a physical impact on our reality. Quality, as was explained yesterday, quantity and distribution across the city is important, but also the quality of this public space. The way they are designed is key to ensure that to have vibrant public spaces that facilitates social interaction, economic activity, safety, and inclusions. Often, rules and regulations around buildings, setbacks, openings towards the streets, plot size, block size, they're not considered and assessed against their impact on the quality of the urban space. In these two pictures above, you have exactly the same streets in terms of width, but as you can imagine, only in one of these two streets will be more pleasant to have a walk and look around. And the difference between the two is purely in terms of blocks of the plot size. In the one below, there are smaller plots, so there is more economic activities. There are less long walls without any visual interaction between buildings and people. In the one below, there are, is a pedestrian road. There are sidewalks. So the experience of living in these walking in these two streets is completely different. Also, walking at night will probably be safer in the streets below because there are going to be shops with lights. Maybe some shops will be open until late at night, which is not going to happen in the city above. That in the street above, that will be completely dark. What I want to get to is to that when designing design standards and guidelines, it's important to assess their physical impacts on the quality of the public space and on and all the conditions that make them more adequate. Another aspect of the regulations that is important is the concept of active facades. I'm not a planning expert, but from what I understand, what is key is the interaction between the private property, so how buildings are designed, and the public space. Many countries are exploring through form-based codes on how to make this interaction between building and the public space in a way that facilitates the quality and the enjoyment of the public space. Another problem in the supply of adequate quantity of public spaces is that cities don't have instruments and tools to acquire the land that is, public spaces, streets, playgrounds, public facilities, parks need land. Without land, that cannot be done. So in majority of the countries where we work, the only instruments cities and municipalities have to access the land is to expropriate it. Virtually every country has these instruments. Is a coercitive measure where the state or the municipalities acquire land, compensating it for a value. I don't think that expropriation is the most suitable way to make available land for public spaces. Why? Because expropriation is costly, both economically, because the cities need to be able to pay market value of the land, and cities don't have if we want to get to that 30, 40, 50% of land for public space, cities will never have the money and the resources to buy off all that land. Is also costly in terms of political consensus. Nobody wants to be expropriated, so it's not politically easy to do. So political leaders try to avoid it as much as possible, and also can be a lengthy process because expropriation can normally be challenged in court and lead to lengthy processes that halt and block the development of infrastructure. So what I'm going to show now briefly is an example of alternative ways of making available land for public spaces from around the world. We believe that the most sustainable way is where, in the process of urbanizing the land, private developers make available land for public use free of charge. They contribute to it. There are many countries where this is done. In this example here, that is subdivision, the instrument is called subdivision exaction. Basically, when converting land from rural to urban use, that implies subdividing a a large agricultural land parcel into small urban plots. Normally, in every country, there is a requirement to submit to a planning authority a subdivision plan. Many countries have a strict requirement for the subdivision plans to have minimum standards for streets, the provision of land for public facilities, green areas and parks and playgrounds. Obviously for large land subdivisions. In this case, the cities acquire the land for the streets, acquires the land required for playgrounds and green areas without paying for it. And this is acceptable as well to landowners. Why? Because the planning authority granting land use change from agricultural to rural has an increase in the value of that land that can be even 7-8 times. So this is when the landowners make a huge profit thanks to a planning decision where the planning authority authorizes the land subdivision. So this is a moment where the landowner is willing and can accept to surrender portion of its land or land for public use. In some other countries, for the construction of hotels, shopping malls, or in general large developments, there can be requirements to surrender part of the land for public use again. In Israel, that can go up to 40% of the land. In the city of Medellin in Colombia, can be even up to 18% of the land, that in case of submitting building permits requests for large development can be requested by the city in exchange for the concession of the building license. Another instruments that can be used and is used in several countries in the world is called land readjustment. Can be complex, but I try to explain it easier. So let's assume we have on the left, the situation on the left, we have a number of landowners that have plots of land. When the current configuration of the plots is not adequate, all the landowners can pool their land together. They can do a local association. They agree to pool the land all together. And they plan it as it was one large piece of land. They plan it together, they create streets, public spaces required, and with the remaining land, they create a number of plots that is equal in number to the number of original landowners. So every landowner from here will get a piece of land that will be smaller in size, but it will be higher in value. So plot D on the left is slightly bigger than plot D on the right, but the value of the smaller plot D on the right is higher in value because it's in an area that has been planned, it has facilities, it has public spaces. So this is a win-win process both for the city because the city does not have to acquire land, so it does not have to expropriate anyone. It's a win-win also for the landowners because nobody needs to be expropriated. All the landowners on the left still are present in the area. But it's a process that can be lengthy, and that requires negotiations. But it is a feasible model that has been used in several countries to replan areas without relying on expropriation and such measures. Some countries are also experimenting with other instruments. This is Manhattan on the left, and all the small dots you see, they are all public spaces that have been created by private landowners in exchange for planning incentives. Planning incentives can be, additional density bonuses. So if those landowners could have built a 5-floor building. The city tells them you can build 6 floors, but with the agreement that you need to create a small square or a park or a playground near your development. In New York, those spaces remain private in terms of land, but they're only they're for public use, but they're still privately owned. So even in this case, the city acquires space for public use without paying for it. On the right is an interesting experiment I found from a city in Mexico, Monterrey. All the red squares you see, they are empty, unused land that the owners are not interested in developing, and the city gives to those owners property tax exemption in exchange for a destination of the land to public use. So the landowners have a benefit because they don't pay property tax, and the city can have, for a certain period of time, that can be short or long, access to valuable spaces that are already available without expropriating them. We'll now talk more about the concept of governance and management. Governance includes all the set of formal rules, which are mostly what I've been talking so far. So all the rules and the regulations that establish how public spaces can be created, they can be managed, they can be used. But also all the informal rules that are followed by communities to use and manage places. You mentioned it before that you believe that one of the ways citizens can contribute to the quality of public spaces is through direct community engagement. But it also includes all the processes that can be used by the cities to formalize this participation. There are many ways in which this can be done. Virtually every country have in their planning processes some form of community involvement. In some countries it's more effective than others. In some it's purely communication of plans. In some there's more genuine interest in involving citizens in the design. And this is what UNHabitat does concretely in collaboration with cities, showing how with new technologies this can be done. What are the benefits? Why is it important to have people getting involved? First of all, in order to respond to people's needs, you need to understand those needs. So it is key to collect data and evidence on what are people's needs and requirements. In addition, people have the direct experience of living in certain places, in using them, so they can provide the best insight that maybe a city engineer does not have. So the participation increases the inclusion of people's needs, and also increases the quality of the end results. Governance also includes the management and the way cities maintain, build, and make those spaces available. And this takes place through, as you recognize in the pool before, through coordination between different institutions. No? This is a picture from Nairobi downtown from a couple of years ago. This is an example to show how public spaces are not under the responsibility of one institution only. But there are several departments within the same municipalities. Could be different levels of governments. In the case where some parks, some areas are owned by regional, provincial, or national governments. So coordination could be key, and it could be one of the reasons why in most cases the end quality of the user qualities is not good. In this example, we have several institutions that could go from the environmental department, the planning department, health, the road, the licensing of the office giving licenses to use the public space in case you want to put a kiosk or you want to do street vending. Some cities have established public spaces institutions as a way of bringing all these functions together. There could be intergovernmental committees or dedicated public space institutions. For example, Bogotá has the Defensoría del Espacio Público, Johannesburg has the City Park and Public Space. There are many cities that are experimenting on finding the best way of ensuring coordination for the management. One trend that we are globally witnessing, and I'm mentioning this slide because of what was mentioned yesterday as the privatization of the public space as one of the problems. It's not exactly the same. This is Johannesburg. All the black dots you see on top, they identify all the public spaces that are privately managed. They are mostly gated communities, office parks, estates, but the areas that are they're for public use, but they are managed by private, mostly neighborhood association. The main problem with that is that, this is Santon. The main problem is that if you go physically there, you'll see a lot of barriers, a lot of gates, physical gates, a lot of private security guards, a lot of signs saying that you cannot sell things on the floor, you cannot be an informal vendors, you cannot be idle and sit on a bench. Maybe you'll find spikes to avoid people to sit and rest. Access to these places is controlled. So this is a global trend that is worrisome. There are examples of well-managed private spaces, but it's important to have rules on freedom of movement, of non-discrimination. So this is key, and this is a global phenomenon happening a lot. This is done mostly for security reasons. They see gates as a way of protecting people living in from dangers, but it has exclusionary implications, especially if it's on this scale. One of the reasons often mentioned for the badly management of public spaces is the lack of financial resources. Cities says we cannot manage, build, keep our public spaces clean because we don't have, we don't have people to work on this. We don't have money. I'm going to show you a few examples. So now, public spaces can be used as an asset. They are an asset. I think Cecilia mentioned it yesterday. Public space creates values, and this is easily understandable. If you have an apartment facing a nice square or a nice park, has a value. The same apartment, one road behind, without view on a park, without view on a nice square, is a different market value. So public space creates private values, and there are ways that have been used extensively, especially in Latin America, where land-based taxation can be property taxation, can be other forms of taxation, can consider that increase in land value that is a consequence of the nice park, of the nice public space. And this increase in revenues for the municipalities can be used to finance public space policies around the city. This park is in Ecuador, in Cuenca, and it was funded with $5 million that were raised in betterment contributions from properties around the park. This street network is in Medellin, which is the second largest city in Colombia. And it was built with what they call in Colombia the Contribución por Valorización, which is a betterment levy. And they collected $1 billion of increased revenues along a long period of time that they used to build this street network. So it is possible to use public spaces as an asset for the city and to create economic development, but also to increase revenues. I will say a few words on the uses. Public space can be used for different purposes. In many countries in the developing world are key for economic employment and for livelihood. In many countries, people even sleep. I mean, there are the homeless. They use the public space to sleep in them. In many places, can be used for cultural activities. Can be used, for transport through bike lanes, to park, bike sharing. I mean, there are different uses. Being public, all these uses are competing, and they can give rise to conflict if there are no if there are no rules on how all these different uses can coexist together. In many African countries, there are fight against informal vendors because they occupy most of the sidewalks that could be used also for people to walk by. So there are real conflicts between pedestrian public authorities, but also and informal vendors. The only way to mediate and to allow coexistence between informal uses is again participation, so understanding what these people needs, and to put in place mechanism to allow this coexistence. What I'm showing here is an urban plan for an Indian city that I don't remember, but I can tell you, is Manipur. Manipur, which is again is an Indian city, as part of the master plan of the town plan, as a street vending master plan. So it includes the use of the public space, identifying areas where street vending is allowed, identifying areas for open-air markets or also indoor markets. So taking into account the uses of the public space when planning the cities. That's a way of avoiding conflicts and considering all the uses that are required. I'm going to conclude my presentation here and say again how important public spaces are for all the reasons we mentioned yesterday, and how important it is to have a framework to guide cities to give cities the instruments to make them, to create them, so to acquire the land, to plan, manage, and design them in a participatory way. I think one of the objectives of the working group session that is going to happen later is to understand, is to reflect on all these things I mentioned and see how new technologies or how new governance changes can make the quality of the public space in these cities better, and how new technologies can contribute and facilitate not only access to information, but also in giving public authorities a way of getting people's needs, access data on what people's needs and how they use the public spaces, and if new technologies can also provide a platform to facilitate collaboration and the sharing of data between different institutions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Crispy. Are we having any questions on this very interesting presentation? Just a minute, yes.
So thank you very much, first of all, for your presentation. I want to ask, you show us some examples of government take place and change and find ways for public space to find new public space or to organize differently. So we have more public space. So how can people and the society engage more to that, to have an opinion or to help with some way in this process?
Thank you. Again, this can be done formally or informally. Informally, let's assume that all the work you have done last week will be presented to the city authority, and is all information they can use. You could also present spontaneously ideas, proposals. So this can be done informally. So communities can organize themselves and make proposals on how to plan, design, use. This proposal can be taken into account or not. But there could also be legal requirements that when developing a neighborhood plan, when developing an infrastructure plan, people need to be included. So this is more a formal way of ensuring participation, but it can also happen informally, spontaneously by communities and people providing their inputs and proposals that in most cases will always be welcomed.
Thank you.
There's a question, the last
Yes.
row.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was very nice and very interesting. I was wondering how have municipalities, or if you could showcase any case study in which maybe there's been a shift from the first level of participation, that people actually do their proposals and participate in this framework of telling their ideas and needs, to the next level of maybe co-managing or ideally co-governance.
Yeah, thank you. No, I didn't mention it, but there are many cases, many examples where publicly owned public spaces are given in management to cooperatives, community groups, neighborhood groups. This is actually quite common. No, it's quite common, I believe. There are many reasons for that to happen. Often the municipalities has no capacity to manage properly all spaces, but in some other instances it's because giving the management to people that are going to use it is also the best way to make sure that the places respond to what people need. And it's also, I find a great way of giving people ownership of the place. And I think the experiences can show that people respect more the places that they feel they own, because they are the one cleaning it. If the community goes once a week to clean a place, it's less likely that people in that community will basically trash it, destroy it, and they will feel it more like their own place, and they will respect it and take care of it more, even more. So I think there are several advantages for that approach. Saving resources to the city and giving more sense of ownership to the communities that is going to use it.
Thank you. We have another question.
Hi, amazing presentation, very very many information to gather, but I have two questions regarding what you said. There were three ways, as the subdivision, extractions, land readjustment, and privately owned public spaces, as you mentioned. The main question, besides the land readjustment, is how do you protect negative effects from these planning measures? For example, I see subdivision extractions with the land value that goes up as a way to gentrification, negative effect. And the second question that it's it's my worries, and I can't answer it, is that all these measures is for the public space to be designed in a time of economical crisis.
Sorry?
It's the design of public spaces in times of economical crisis when the governments and the national governments and the municipalities don't have the funding. And there are ways to try to find these fundings from the private sector. Shouldn't be the main objective to request more aggressively this type of funding besides the public sector from the governments and not have the negative effects mentioned above?
Thank you. So I think the first question was more about the impact that this private contribution can have on the land prices and on the cost of housing that could lead to gentrification effects. I must say that you might be right. Actually, I don't remember in which places, but I think there are examples where people living in neighborhoods oppose its improvement. Example, I spend time in Berlin often, and there are neighborhoods where residents make the place look dirtier on purpose to prevent more affluent people to move in. So means spraying the walls, making graffiti, keeping, exactly for that reason, because they don't want more affluent people to move in. So any effort to improve the quality of a neighborhood can have impacts on the cost of the housing and lead to economic evictions and gentrification efforts. I don't know if we have an official answer to that on how to deal with these risks. There are ways. For example, I mentioned Berlin, but now we go more in the regulations around the housing sector. There are ways of controlling increases in rent. So all instruments to control increases in rent prices that cannot be done more than X percentage per year, or linked to the inflation and not linked to market values. But again, there are many people saying that also these mechanisms don't really work. I think what we normally say is that if the cities, because in the end, the cost of housing is linked to supply and demand. When there is excess in demand for housing and the market is not providing enough housing, there's increase in land, not increase in the cost of affordable housing. But if the city is able to make available enough housing and there is no housing deficit, it's less likely that the cost of housing will go up. I don't know if I was clear. And the other question was about, sorry, can you? Should have taken notes. Yeah. Exactly.
So it's like giving aspirin to a person with cancer. The main objective is not more aggression in the use by public funding in order to have a protection shield.
Clear. This is the PPP framework. So this is a partnership between private and public sectors, and how to make them work for the common goods or for the public interest. Private funding and private involvement can be key and can be useful. to address your concern, you need legal framework that consider how to make sure that public funding does not compromise the public interest. So ensuring public access, that nobody's going to be discriminated in the use. So putting, setting boundaries on what the private sector can do when providing funds. So completely far west, just accepting money or letting the private sector building, managing and running it without setting conditions or criteria on the uses that can be allowed, people that can be accessed, that can use it, is quite dangerous. But if there are legal frameworks that establish clear conditions, that risk can be minimized. Question down there.
Yeah, I want to. It's probably you probably have answered half of that question, but it's related to the last question. So, I really enjoyed the presentation, and especially your point on the market value of like creating value through sort of like public space development, right? I want to raise two examples of how sort of like municipalities or the public sector fails to sort of like develop an area. And we have one of the most scandalous such developments here in Greece, which is the Ellinikon airport. You might know about it. This is a huge piece of land that was sold for very, very little to the private sector. And which is, you know, in Greece, another example could be the Heatherwick Garden Bridge in London, where again, like a bridge which was supposed to be like a really nice garden, ended up being sort of like funded by Sky News, etc., etc. So when the government, or like when the public sector fails to develop public space and sort of like offloads it to the private sector, other ways to make the private sector either through institutionalized sort of like processes to have a participatory approach to it, or even better through a market driven approach where you essentially convince the private sector that having a participatory process, having a process that involves citizens would actually lead to better value, because cities have an incentive to keep their citizens happy. Private sector doesn't necessarily have so, unless you prove to them that there's value to it. So is there a way to do that?
Again, setting conditions for the projects to be beneficial, as the term says, both for the public and for the private sector. Often cities, I don't know if they don't have the capacities to negotiate, or they don't want to negotiate good conditions for the public, but the only way is to have a clear framework where the public sector does not have a free hand, but is binded by strict rules on what can or cannot do, on if it's going to charge access, how much it's going to charge, for how many years. There are all these formulas of build, operate, and transfer, BOT, where basically the private sector has the land, builds it, develops it, can use it for X amount of years, and then they need to transfer it back to the government. There are different ways of protecting the public interest. Again, often cities don't have the capacities because they are the weaker player often. If it's a big private companies don't have the capacities or the power to negotiate, they're just excited to get funding or to get a project going without considering all the possible negative externalities that private involvement can have, and they can be long lasting. And that can go, I don't know, I can think of my own country, all these private concession of beaches, that is public, it is given to through private concessions to the private sector to make huge amount of money without getting back any significant resources, and creating also a problem of accessibilities of low-income people to the seaside, because often it's blocked. So there are many instances where that relationship can be problematic.
Thank you. Are we having any other questions? Okay. So thank you, Mr. Crispy again. Mrs. Geropada, you may present us our next speaker.
Thank you for the very interesting presentation and the very inspiring one. As we see, we have a lot of engagement in this part. May I call here to the podium Mrs. Cristiana Lauri, who is coming, she's the coordinator of the Global Pandemic Networks Working Group on Governance and COVID. And she's also an adjunct professor of urban law and town planning and cultural heritage frameworks at Sapienza University of Rome. Please, thank you very much.
Thank you, Valina, and thank you all, especially to the Center for Mediterranean Architecture, to the city of Cagna, and the Technical University of Crete, and also UN Habitat. I know that they are co-organizer and a great part of the contents of this conference is coming from UN Habitat expert knowledge, so we are very happy with this. So I will try to be very brief because Gianluca said a lot today, so just to give you well, an overview of the Global Pandemic Network. I'm here to represent the Global Pandemic Network, so I'll show you who we are, what we did, and what we can do together here in Cagna. So, first of all, this is, yes, oh, okay, sorry, okay. Do I have, oh, okay. Okay. Well. The Global Pandemic Network is a community made from people coming from university. So we are changing our approach with my presentation. I'm not coming from an institution, but from the university. So our aim is to try to build a theoretical framework which can help to study basically the consequences related to the pandemic. We obviously started with COVID-19. The network was established last year in May 2020, and we started to build a framework, an approach, and a methodology to study the legal and economic consequences of the pandemic. So the consequences, but also the response of states, of regional institutions, local institutions, and also the academic world, the way we studied phenomena, the way we make networks around the world. So this is something very peculiar because we started this new activity and we connected hundreds of scholars all over the world. And this was something that surprised us for the rapidity and the effort that all the members made during these years to build something, to research about the topics related to the pandemic. We especially identified these thematic focuses, and the first topics that we studied with the members of the network were human rights, environment, and cities. So the network was born basically from scholars with an expertise on global environmental law. So there is a strong link between the studies on environmental, climate, pollution, waste regulation, and the outbreak of the pandemic. This is the starting point of the network. Then we moved to government response. We held another global webinar about this. So we moved from the thematic focus to the methodology and the actors, basically, of the response. And we are planning to organize the next steps of the network for late 2021 with competition, digital society, and healthcare systems. So this will be the 3 thematic focus that will start their activity for the rest of the year. Well, I will start from the first global webinar because this gave a sort of imprinting to our activities, basically for the title, the topic that we chose, which was cities, not by case. We chose cities because the COVID outbreak and the COVID main consequences were shown by cities all around the world. So we found this point really crucial to establish the first phase of our studies. And the title was Building Resilience on Human Rights and Environmental Protection. So the 2 main topics that we started to study were human rights and environmental protection. And with these 2 assets, different group of scholars started to research and to write down reports. So Gianluca and we are leading the 3rd working group, which is about cities and governance. So we are 3 working groups. One is on environment, one is on human rights, and one is on governance. We tried to give an organization to these members that we have in the group with institutional impacts, spatial impacts, and economic impacts. The group is interdisciplinary, so we have architects like Dr. Valina Heropanta, but we also have legal specialists, lawyers, urban planners, and urban lawyers, experts of urban economics, so different expertise, different approaches, and this is not that easy to communicate and to work together on a common issue and to find a methodology that can be shared among all these people, but we are trying. Then, the focus of the working group. We are following the main approach of the network, which is, as I said, building resilience on human rights and environmental protection, especially based at theoretical level on this strategy, which is called One Health. This is a strategy that is now emerging from different documents at global level. So we have a great effort from WHO, UNEP, and UN Food and Agricultural Organization, for example, and others. As you can see, I won't mention all of them, but you can see on the screen. And they're trying to build a framework for the implementation of this strategy. Why this strategy? This strategy is based on the awareness of the link between human health, animal health, and the environment. So this is why we are stressing the concepts of human rights and environmental protection, and we are trying to give a common vision on these topics. This is something which has to be used also to build common and integrated strategies, policies, and governance. And this is why I found important to mention the general approach of the Global Pandemic Network, because it's not something that remains at a theoretical level, but is something that is now clearly emerging from the international documents. Also, if we look at the European strategies, the more recent European strategies, we can find lots of indications and concrete examples of how these strategies can be can enter the regulatory framework of different states at different level. And I'll skip something. Okay, and yes, I want to show you something more concrete about what this One Health is. So we have like an official definition of this strategy. So not strategies, but they call them policy or practice, and they call they are considering other concepts I mentioned before, resilience, and this interdependence between humans, wildlife, animals, plants, and so the concept of biodiversity is also crucial according to this concept. And as you can see, there is a strong link with the dimension of both human rights and environmental protection. Okay, moving from this framework, we tried to identify the challenges for cities. So, according to the first studies emerged from the Global Pandemic Network, cities are at the front line. And some of the scholars who started to research on the topic identified a first list of activities or tasks for cities. So first of all, implementing environmental law to city planning and management. So something that also emerged from the presentation by Gianluca, but also from the definition of public space that gave us Cecilia yesterday. Then implementing environmental impact assessment, so also strategic environmental assessment. So this kind of administrative procedures that are affecting the planning processes. So we are experiencing a sort of merging between planning activities and environmental principles, which is something very important. Is not something that we have to take for granted. It's something that is starting to be implemented and that we still have to enforce in some contexts. So this is another pillar. And then we move to more technical points like revising construction and building standards. This is what Gianluca was presenting. Then something different like promoting circular economy principles. So we are moving to something which is maybe more related to the economic development and also related to sustainable development, so a new way to imagine and to build economic policies. Maybe later we can say something about circular economy. And then preparing climate change mitigation and adaptation measures. Here we are in the field of prevention. So another change of paradigm for cities is the shift from a sort of ex-post approach to an ex-ante approach. So trying to face disasters, both natural but also something extreme like the COVID, by making systems stronger and more resilient. Then there is a task related to natural areas and parks at local level, and we can include here different kind of public spaces. I won't repeat this because the presentation you heard yesterday were very clear and complete on this. And last but not least, the integration and the implementation of digital transition related with health and environmental policies, which is something that is very important for this conference, is something that we are trying to connect with all this framework. So given these points, this is just the first ideas that we got from the researches from the scholars of the Global Pandemic Network. There will be more, I'm sure. And I'm showing you briefly the steps that we moved in the last year. So very, very quickly, we tried to organize conferences, webinars, mostly related to Sustainable Development Goal 11, and more specifically to the sub-targets of the Target 11. So we talked about the role of local and central governments and the interaction between all the different institutional actors. This was our first debate to face the topic of governance. And then we talked about living, so something related both to inclusion but also to informality, so different issues basically related to this subtopic. And then another another topic that we faced, and we made also some publications on this, is about soft mobility, so how city can change the way people move within the urban areas. And you may remember, maybe someone was here and someone was presenting something in here. You were part of the work of the working group on governance. We talked about smart city concepts for augmenting urban health with groups, with examples, and this was the first step that led us today here. So if you remember what I said about integration, sorry, there is, yes, okay. There is a problem with this presentation, okay. I will just give you an example of Cagna. So how can we face the urban challenges trying to link what we know with the context we are in now. So I tried with the help of Rose to identify some information from Cagna, which can be a starting point to build a new assessment. So you did the assessment on public space, and you studied the urban morphology of Cagna, but we can move to a second step of the assessment, more related to the governance system and to the public administration. So just some suggestion. I will identify some information related to both organization and activities. I'll give you some keywords because we don't have much time to describe a regulatory framework or the way a public administration is working. But I want to share with you these keywords, which I find very important, which are organization and activity, and then I explain why. So here, for example, I took these from the web page of Cagna. I don't know Greek, so I translated these. And these are just some examples of how the municipality of Cagna is organized with these offices. So if you remember what Gianluca was presenting before about different competencies, different structure that are in charge with the care of one particular topic, or we call it public interest in city, we can look here that we have different administrative structure, each one with its targets, its people, its knowledge. And this is a first piece of information. We can start thinking about, is such a subdivision of the administrative structure useful? Can we change it? Would it be useful to change it, or to have some maybe rules or tools to make this structure better interact to each other? So a bunch of questions can arise from this first information. And then I selected something else, which is related to the regulatory framework at local level. So just selected some regulation which could be useful to manage the topic of public space. So as you can see here, in Cagna we have a regulation for the concession of common areas, playgrounds, markets, municipal halls, so there are also other regulations. So this is another piece of information about how the local authority is working, and what are the topics that the city is directly regulating. For example, here we have, I just always with the help of Rose, identify this little extract, which is about detailed rules on some issues that also Gianluca was mentioning before. So binding rules about how to manage public space, about how to balance urban development. So just to show you how you can start to get familiar with the framework of your city, and why looking this information in this way, by identifying the organization and the activity, can be useful to have a clear mindset to assess the governance framework. Then, what about the challenges? So there is one first challenge is about implementing the existing regulatory framework, but also make the existing framework effective and enforce the regulatory framework. So this is different according to the system that we are studying. It's not a general problem, but this is a test that we can use to assess the regulatory framework of a city. So first suggestion to start to imagine maybe how to build an assessment about the governance framework, and also challenges related to the activity. So here I want to focus your attention lastly about these 2 points, which I find very interesting. So first of all, what about activity? We talked about the importance of participatory processes. You also asked about participatory processes. And this is important also to make sure that all the stakeholders have a voice within the administrative decision. And this is one point. But participation can be also related to infrastructural coordination. So coordination with all the other public administration and institution who are participating to the management process. So if you remember one of the questions, maybe the third of your poll, you answered many institutions are responsible for public space. So this is crucial. We have to have an activity, we have to make sure that the administrative activity takes into account the power and the role of each public institution that is in charge with the care of a particular public interest that can affect decisions about public space. And this is more important if we remember what Gianluca was saying before about the role that the city can have in increasing land value. So it's something that can affect people, so rights of people and the richness of people, but also quality of life of people. But it can also affect the free market, because the city can decide how to plan, how to organize its spaces, and some discriminations can occur. Land use and planning is full of discrimination. So we come back to the general approach of the network, which is human rights, which is equality, which is trying to find ways to make, solidarity maybe, and cohesion, and to try to face the social conflict that can emerge in urban contexts. And then what about organization? So here I have an idea that I want to share with you. Participation is not the only solution that we can have. So first of all, we need a culture of public interest, both within the public institution, but also from people who has to interact with the institution. So I would say, maybe to provoke your curiosity on this, that stress on participation can even hide a lack of trust in the capacity of the public administration and the institution. So what you were saying before about co-organization, co-governance, co-managing could be an option and could be very useful to avoid that participation is the only way, but maybe rely on expert knowledge of public administration, both with the co-mechanism could be a solution to balance private and public interests in an equal way. And then there is something which I want also to highlight, which is upskill and reskill of public administration. This is something, the wording which I took from the recovery plans that the states are now implementing to get out of the COVID crisis from institutional and economic crisis. And upskill and reskill are providing resources both for people, so for private, for citizens, but also for public institutions. So these resources that we have now due to the COVID recovery can help to improve the knowledge and the expertise of public administration. And this is fundamental because this can help communities to trust more local authorities, to trust their expertise, and also maybe to have to improve the awareness from this institution regarding some crucial topics. For example, sorry, what's happening? For example, public space, which is the one we are talking today. And according to this idea, it could be very useful to provide cities, especially if we want to talk about smart cities, so to equip cities with expertise, with up-to-date knowledge. If we will start this assessment, maybe through a questionnaire or other questions to the municipality, we can maybe check what expertise are now working within the local authorities. So, for example, do we have, I don't know, a mobility manager, an energy manager, someone who is an expert on clean energy, on efficiency, or on resilience, on disaster prevention, or again, if we think to smart cities and to data management, do we have a data protection officer, a digital manager, someone who is expert with algorithmic decisions, someone who is responsible for transparency and prevention of corruption? So all these topics that are crucial to switch to an institution which is up to date and which is able to face the complexity of the current urban context. So here just there was an exchange of slides. This was first, just to show you that cities are not always working alone. So there are some activities that they have to carry out together with other public administration. So just to frame the complexity when we were talking about fragmentation and the need for integration, we have to consider that cities are not alone. So one of the challenges is to build the regulatory framework and to understand how to combine all the different sources and documents that we can have both at local level, at maybe at the level of the central government, but also supranational documents or international one. So I won't say more on this. And okay, maybe I can stop, but before I just want to give you some suggestions to, or maybe we can do it later during the working group session, but my suggestion is to just very briefly to imagine something that can be assessed with the local government. So I invite you to maybe imagine some questions, then we can make to I don't know, we can identify someone who will be our partner in this kind of activity, about an assessment on the organization. So who is responsible for what? Who is responsible for public space? Do we have an authority for public space? As Gianluca mentioned, there are some cities that are equipped with such a department. I don't know if in Kenya there is, you will find it out. Or how do the different departments in the city interact, and what expertise are working on public space in Kenya, also related to the knowledge about new technology and smart technology. And then we can also assess the regulatory framework, the tools. Are they binding, non-binding? Do they follow a traditional approach, an authoritative approach? Do they have a particular procedure for participation, for public debate, or for observation, or different kind of interaction while taking decisions which are affecting public space? So this can be really useful. And last but not least, all these questions and what you did yesterday, what you are doing today, and what you will do tomorrow will be part of a final publication that we will have with maybe, hopefully, with Legal and Pandemics, which is the journal of the Global Pandemic Network. We will edit with Dr. Valina Geropanta a special issue dedicated to the work during these conferences. And for me, it's enough. I invite you to join the Global Pandemic Network. If you want, you can join as a student. If you are a scholar or a researcher, as a member. If you represent another university, as a partner. So thank you very much, and see you later for the working sessions.
Thank you, Ms. Laurit.
Hello, and thank you very much for your presentation. It was really interesting that you jumped in, you went from theory to practice, and you took these print screens from Chania Municipality website. Well, my question is, if you agree that just as we design differently in different countries, management is also different. And what I'm trying to say is that, to my understanding, we need an approach, a different approach, a roadmap, to go from, as you said, current approaches to participatory ones. Do you think that we also need to have all the cultural differences? For example, in Greece, you have a different mentality from, let's say, Scandinavia. How do you think that we can integrate this different mentality?
Oh, this is not that easy to answer to this, but yes, I think that, well, I'd like to mention a general principle which could be very useful here, which is proportionality. So when we have to decide not only about the regulatory framework, but more concretely to the administrative activity, so to the way we design proceedings, procedures, and also the involvement of communities, we have to consider this proportional approach. So we have to assess the situation, to study the context, to have clear in mind the weakest area of a regulatory framework, and then we can build something new, moving from what is existent. I don't think that switching from an approach to another is a solution, because people is working on this, and processes within, especially public decision processes, are slow. So you have to give time both to the authorities and both to citizens to be aware of what they are doing, to enforce their expertise on the topic they are deciding about, and then we can try to imagine a new procedure and a new way to decide and to come up with new solution. And maybe Gianluca and the other from UN Habitat are familiar with this, as they are working in a comparative way within different frameworks, within different with different rules, so they know perfectly how difficult it is to concretize something that you have as an abstract model and put it into the real life and the real administration. So your question maybe can have a different answer if we consider different systems, but if we take the example of the European Union, for example, even within the European Union and even within the same supranational regulatory framework, we have deep differences among states, among the way they can implement. So some states, we know, they take sanctions because they're not compliant with the rules. So there are imbalances among all the different contexts. So it's not possible to consider all the systems the same way. So I agree on this, just to answer to your question. It's not possible to apply to all the same rules. We are just trying to identify common principles, which is not that easy, but it's the first step to build something that progressively becomes concrete and can help to move a step forward towards a more effective and consistent with human rights protection and resilient system. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Are we having any other question from Ms. Lowry? Okay, so thank you again for your presentation. We will take now a short coffee break, gather for our third work session, and continue with our live streaming after our lunch break around 1500. Thank you all for watching us.